Today's daf is daf Chaf Aleph. Now we learned on daf Chaf Hamid Beis a suffix of Rami Bar Chama in a case where she owns a tavla and the get was written on the tavla. She gave the tavla over to her husband. He wrote a get on the tavla and delivered the get to her. And we have a halacha called Sefer HaMakna, which means that the makna, in this case the Baal, has to own the get. And Rami Bar Chama vacillates as to whether or not we could assume that she was makna him the tavla so that he could now give her the get. And Abai made an attempt to resolve this question of Rami Bar Chama with a case of a zaken, and Rava rejects that proof by saying that, okay, in the case of a zaken, he's a scholar, he certainly knows the halacha, and therefore he did the hakna that was necessary to effectuate the chalos. But in the case of an isha, how do we know? And that was Rami Bar Chama's suffix, whether or not she was makna the tavla on which the get was given back to the Baal. And now we're up to Ella Omar Rav, which is on the top of Daf Chaf Aleph. We're going to be poshet the suffix of Rami Bar Chama Hacha from the following din, which is recorded in the Mishnah at the end of Masechet Bava Basra with regard to an orev. Now, there are two categories of an orev. There's an orev b'shas halva. Notice he was mischayev as a cosigner, as a guarantor for the loan at the time of the halva. He doesn't need a kinyan. But our discussion here is about an orev li'achar halva. In other words, the money was already given over from the malva to the lova, and the lova gave a shtar to the malva, and now the orev wants to be mischayev to guarantee the loan. That means that if the lova defaults on the loan, the malva will be able to collect from the orev. What did the orev do? He signed arvus, and he said, Anochi ani orev, but it was after the chasima of the shtar, because the shtar was already given over to the malva. Now the orev is the mischayev, because he's accepting upon himself a shibud vis-a-vis the malva to pay back the malva if. And orev hayotze li'achar chitum shtaros, so the Edom already signed on the shtar alva. Now the orev, with his own signature, his own ksav yad, adds the word vani orev. And the halach is that it's a valid arvus and gove minichasim midei chorim. Now what that means is that the malva must have taken the shtar and he was makne to the orev so that the orev could be mischayev on the shtar and create the shtar. Because again, Sefer HaMakna teaches me that only the makna, the mischayev, meaning the orev, can own the shtar in order to create a valid shtar. So we're going to have to assume that the malva was makna the shtar over to the orev. The orev signed the shtar, and therefore he was makna his shibudim to the malva. So we see that any person, even though he's not a zaken, is assumed to do whatever is necessary in order to create a shtar, and that means to create a Sefer HaMakna, and that implies that he certainly knew to be makna whatever he had to be makna over to the zocha. The zocha in this case is the malva. Okay, so the hischayvus is valid because the orev became the owner of the shtar by virtue of the fact that the malva was makna in the shtar, and therefore we're going to assume in the case of a get that when the get was inscribed on a tavla that was owned by her, she then went ahead and was makna the tavla to the Baal so that he could be megarish her with this Sefer HaMakna. Rav Ashi my kusha. Rav Ashi says that your comparison, Rava, is not a proof at all. Dilma, perhaps, Gavra Shaini. Let's differentiate between a man. A man is out there in the shuk, he's a baki bedinim, he knows how to make a shtar properly, diodel aknuye, and therefore he knows that it takes a hakna in order for the shtar to be valid. However, in the case of a woman, she's less of an expert on the dinim, and she might not know that she has to be makna to the Baal, the Tavla that she owns, on which the get was written. So therefore, says Rav Ashi, you have no proof, Rava, from the case of a man, namely an Arif. Elamar of Ashi, let's be machriya the suffix of Rami Bar Chava from a Mishnah later on at Daf Chav Beis. Isha koseves es gita, a woman could take out her own niyar and write a get, then she's makneh to the Baal. The Baal now gives it to her as a gerushin. V'ish, so too a man who's now, after he divorces his wife, he's going to pay up his ksuba, and now he wants a shovar, a document of receipt that testifies to the effect that he paid up the ksuba, and he's going to write the shovar. So again, she's interested in getting the get, so she's going to make sure the get is written on her own niyar, and then she'll be makneh to the Baal. He's interested in getting a shovar, so therefore he's going to write the shovar on his own niyar, but she's the makneh here because she's the mischayev who stands to lose by this shovar that testifies to the fact that she no longer can collect her ksuba, was already paid up. So therefore, his niyar for the shovar now has to go over to her. He has to be makneh to the isha, in order that she can now write a shovar and give over the shovar to the Baal. So she's going to get a shtar, and it's a shovar. She receives it from the Baal. She gets two Eidim to sign on it. She gives it back to the Baal, so that now he has a shtar biyodo, a valid shtar, to testify and prove that he paid up the ksuba. She'ein kiyum get el b'chosmav. The hechsher of the get, or any shtar for that matter, is through the signature of Eidim. And therefore, it matters not who wrote the shtar, but rather who signs the shtar. And we're assuming that even a woman in this case, with regard to a shovar on a ksuba, is knowledgeable enough to be makneh to the Baal. And in the case of a get, therefore, by analogy, she's smart enough to be makneh the get to the Baal. And that's how a woman could write a get on her own tavla and be makneh the tavla back to the Baal, and he gives her the get, and it's a valid gerush. Now the Gemara goes on to discuss a different case entirely. Amar Rava, kasav lo get unasanu b'yad avdo, v'kasav lo shtar matonalov kna asa u'miskareshes bo. A pella of a chidush. Rava says that when it says in the Torah v'nasan b'yada, it doesn't necessarily mean that he actually gives the get into her hand. In fact, he can be makneh a get to her, and in this particular scenario, he wrote the get on the arm of an eved, and then he was makneh the eved to the isha through a shtar matana. She now acquires the eved and also the get that's in the hand of the eved, u'miskareshes po. In other words, the eved now becomes like ha-chatzer. Once she makes a kinyan on the chatzer, and the get is in the chatzer because it's in the hand of the eved, she's kona ha-get with chatzer. And this is based on a Gemara later on in Daf Ayin Zayin, that if a man throws a get into a chatzer min isha, then the get is valid. Now, we're not going to say that that since at the time that the Baal gave the get into the Eved's hand, it was not her Eved. It doesn't matter. Right? Where is the Nesina Liyada? I mean, it's not her Chotzer at the time that the Baal put the get into the hand of the Eved. But the answer is the Akna itself is the Nesino. And that's called, in the Gemara's language, Gita v'chatzera boin te'achas. That simultaneously she acquires the chatzer in which the get is and the get itself. And the gerushin is valid. Vamai. Wait a second, you have a problem here. You're telling me that the Eved, once she acquires ownership over the Eved, serves as a chotzer. But we have a principle that a chotzer must be stationary, and a chotzer maleches that moves from place to place, like an animate object, is not capable of serving as a chotzer lokana. And therefore, since a chotzer maleches is not kona as a chotzer, then it cannot be considered yada, and the gerushin should be invalid. And at the end of the day, the Gemara is going to have to talk about a case of kafus, where the Eved is actually tied up. The chi tema, and if you'll defend Rava and explain that the get is in the yad of the Eved, and she's megureshes when he's makna the Eved to her. Bit Omed, in a case where the Eved, at that moment in time when the Baal was makna the Eved to Isha, he was standing, so therefore he's not a mahalech. Well, V'amar Rava, kol she'ilu mahalech lokana, Omed v'yoshev lokana. We're going to define the essence of the mahalech. If he's a mahalech, then he cannot serve as a chotzer, even at the moment that he's standing. V'hilchasa. So what do we do now at the end of the day in order to explain Rava's din that you can write a get on and hand it over to the Eved and then be makna the Eved to her and it's a valid get? B'kafus. The Eved is kafus, he's not capable of halicha, that changes his status and he becomes a chotz. Another din. Omar Rava chasav la get v'nisano b'chatzero. He puts the get down in his own chotzer. Because of l'shtar matana olav knaso misgareshes bo. He could be makna her the chotzer by giving her a shtar matana, and the gerushin is valid. In other words, the akna of the chotzer is itself considered an asina. And once again, we're going to quote this halach of Gita v'chatzera bon kachas. Now, Rava seems to be repeating himself. We had the principle of Gita v'chatzera bon kachas in the case of a get b'yada Eved. Why does he have to give us now the second case of being makna the chotzer? We need both. The iyashmeina, if we only had Rava's first statement in the case of a get that was given to the Eved, to the yada Eved, havamina, dafka Eved, aval chotzer, who is makna the chotzer, we should institute a gzera of what mishum chatzera haba li'achar mikan. What would happen if the Baal would put the get down into someone else's chotzer, and then afterwards, that person would sell the chotzer or give it as a gift to the Isha. In such a case, the get is not valid because there was never an asina or, for that matter, a hakna directly from the Baal to the Isha. When the Baal is makna the chotzer and the get was put into the chotzer, that's one thing. That constitutes a nesina. But when the Baal puts it into his chotzer and then he's makna the chotzer to someone else, or for example, if let's say the Baal puts the get down in someone else's chotzer and that person is makna the chotzer to the Isha, there's no nesina at all, and therefore the get is not valid. So we in the Havmid would say that in the case of a chotzer, we should be gozer because of a chatzera boliachar mikan. On the other hand, yashmein and chotzer, if Rav had told me this din in the case of a chotzer, I would have thought dafka chotzer, avol Eved, the Eved is a case of a chotzer shenim alechas because he's tied up, is ligzar kafus otu shenu kafus. We should make a gzera and we should say the get is possible because tomorrow they're going to think that you could put a get in the yad of an Eved and give her the Eved through a hakna shtar matana, and she's megureshes, which is not so because the Eved cannot serve as a chotzer since he's a chotzer malechus. Amar Abaye is going to reject this halacha of Gita v'chatzera bon kachas. Michti. Let's analyze this din that a person could put a get into his chotzer and then be makna ha the chotzer. Now watch what happens here. In the case of Rava, where a person puts the get into a chotzer, his own chotzer. Then he's makna the chotzer. The only way possible that she could be megureshes is if she acquires ownership over the chotzer, over the evet, if he's kofus. And that requires her das kona. Now, gerushin work even bal karcha. So Abai analyzes the following. Mechad Israboy, chotzer is derived from the pasuk of miyada. The Torah says, Minasan biyada. And we're going to interpret the word biyada in the parshan kitetse as birshusa. And therefore, when the get was placed into the chotzer, it's as if, I'm talking about the chotzer of the isha, it's as if it was placed into a yad. But ma yada de isa bein midai to bein bal karcha. Gerushin, by definition, is going to operate bal karcha, whether she wants to accept the get or not. He puts it into her chotzer, he puts it into her yad, as af chatzer de isa bein midatu bein bal karcha. So the gerushin has to be done in such a way that she could, that it's very possible that despite the fact that she objects and protests to receiving the get, nevertheless she's meguresh b'matana. But in a case where a person puts a get into his chutz and then he's makna the chutz as a matana, is then midaita isa bal karcha lesa. That can only be operative and valid if she agrees to be kona the chutzer. If she rejects the chutzer, she doesn't want the schus in acquiring ownership on a chutzer or an evid, and especially if there's a get inside of this, the mevela, she's not meguresha. So the entire enterprise of gerushin in these cases of Rava is contingent on the fact that she has das. And we don't accept gerushin when there's only a possibility of having it midaita. So now Rav Shimi Bar Ashi is going to ask a kasha on Abaye. Maskifla Rav Shimi Bar Ashi. If the gerushin was effectuated by giving the get into a shliach, that would require as an absolute condition that it was midaita, because you can't appoint the shliach for the isha against her will. Kahavi shliach lekabbalah. Only if she agrees to have this shliach as a shliach kabbalah does he have the effective status of a shliach lekabbalah. So here's a case where the gerushin is only possible mirtzona and midaita, not bal karcha. Abaye, how's Abaye going to defend himself against the onslaught of Rav Shimi? Atu shlichus miyadis raboy mi v'shilach v'shilcha israboy. The case of shliach is not derived from the pasuk v'nasan biyada, which would mean biyada bal karcha, but rather it's derived from v'shalach v'shilcha. And the Gemara later on in Daf Samach Beis Amid Beis is going to derive from v'shilcha mi beis, so that it could have said v'shilach mi beis. So what's v'shilcha? V'shilcha means through her shliach. So that's a separate parasha of shlichus, and the yad of the shliach is like the yad of the isha, and it could be a valid gerushin despite the fact that we need her approval to appoint the shliach. Ibais ema. And if you want to offer another answer to Rav Shimi's question on Abaye, shlichus lekabbalah nami ashkan bal karcha, within the whole purview of shlichus, of gerushin through shlichus, we do have a bal karcha. Where do we find the shliach that operates to be makabel to get against the will of the isha? That's the case of a katana. Shekain of makabel get lebito katana bal karcha. A father receives the get as a shliach for his daughter, even against her will. So we have a shlichus lekabbalah, which is like yada, and it's bal karcha. She has no say in the matter, and so too we could. But in contrast, I should say, in the case of chotzer, there's no situation, argues Abaye, in which the chotzer could be kona the get unless she approved and consented to be kona the chotzer and make it into yada. And therefore, it's not similar to yada, which is bal karcha, and it's not a valid get. The Mishnah says that al ola shel zayis, val keren shel para, in the case where he wrote the get on a leaf of an olive tree or on the horn of a para, then he gives her the Ola Shel Zayis, he delivers the Keren Shel Para, not the Keren, I should say, the Para itself, or if he wrote the get on the Yad of an Eved, he gives her the Eved, and she's Meguresh. So, and the Gemara says, Bishlam Yad Eved. I understand very well that if a man writes a get on the arm of an Eved, then he's got to give her the entire Eved. I mean, there's no other option here. He can't, Chas Sholem, cut off the arm of the Eved and give her the get separated from his body, because a man is not allowed to cut off the arm of his Eved